When Sabrina Carpenter released her album, Short and Sweet, on August 23, 2024, it was highly anticipated in light of her singles Espresso, Please, 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 and Taste, with each subsequent video building upon the last, establishing Sabrina's style and playful aesthetic for this musical phase of her career. The media and promotional materials for the album kept a consistent visual story of playful fashion from the past, bright colors, bold, beautiful outfits, and a brimming female confidence to celebrate the rest of the summer. It's interesting to ask ourselves, why is this cover so memorable? Viewed quickly, it's nothing out of the ordinary, but oftentimes it's just those types of media which can be so extraordinary. Other than great marketing and the musical talent leading up to this release, the album cover wins in its simplicity. Together, we'll examine why this image is so effective. To do that, we'll reach for tools in both art theory and art history to create an artistic analysis of the image and to define parallels for us to appreciate why this cover just works. Of the many art elements, we're going to use 3 to examine this piece: value, space, and color. These separate elements amalgamate to create a simple yet incredibly effective cover. Let's start with value first. Value is defined as the lightness and darkness of tones in an image. When you see gradients, you see different values transitioning from darkest to lightest and vice versa. This is often shown with a grayscale, like this. We can see that values are crucial to create an illusion, or, in this case, the very real representation of an object being 3D. Illusions are part of the backbone of creating good art. Here, we see a good use of strong values, both light and very dark, throughout a gradient in a vignetted frame to achieve this. A trick to find and identify any value in an art piece, or in your own work, is to squint your eyes. Do you see the darkest dark shades? Do you see the lightest lights? Those are the values applied, and those values can make or break your brain's interpretation of an image. For example, if we were to wash out the values of this album cover, it wouldn't nearly be as effective. In fact, it would even look a bit bland and confusing, and our brain would struggle to find a focal point or place the subject in relation to other tones. As we can see, the darkest values of this image are the 4 corners around Sabrina, which actually create that vignette effect we mentioned. We've seen this effect before in popular culture, but from another time. Go back and search for older family photos from the department store photo craze of the 80s and 90s and onwards, and you will find plenty of awkwardly vignetted photography there. And this vignette effect brings in both levity as well as historical reference into channeling the overall atmosphere of the album. Further, we can see that the shadows framing Sabrina are the other darkest darks in the piece. Most notably, the shadow framing her face and her iconic cheekbone accentuates her style and her iconic makeup. The lightest value is the light glinting off of her open shoulder. It appears glowy or dewy and suggests that she is out in the sun. This plays upon the romantic and adult themes that run throughout her album, as well as in her music video, Espresso. Lastly, let's examine the final darkest value we haven't touched on here. This is the last value that helps our mental maps define this image. The kiss mark on her shoulder is a striking mid to dark value on the cover. It sticks out and is notably much darker than her mauve lipstick that she is wearing. Glancing at her lip shape, as well as the shape of the kiss mark, it looks to be the same set of lips, perhaps playing upon the ideas of self-care and self-love that run throughout the album as well. Now that we have discussed value, let's move on to space. Space refers to the positive and negative areas of an artwork or an image, and how that image is being filled or where it is left blank. Now, considering the cover, we can clearly identify that there is a use of negative space as our primary mode of framing the subject, and this negative space works together with the values aforementioned to create the portrait. This element of art at work is as straightforward as it comes. We see our subject placed in the center of the frame, and the most intriguing elements of the portrait are actually stacked in a row, a powerful use of that positive space as well as the idea of proximity. Now, let's move on to color. Color theory is a rich field in art practice and education, and there are many different color schemes you can follow to create a cohesive piece of work. Not to be confused with value, color refers to the hues of an object, whereas value is purely how light or how dark that color is. Color defines what objects we see, and value creates the depth of an artwork. The color scheme applied to this piece centers around the triadic color scheme. Triadic color schemes refer to three colors that are equidistant from one another on the color wheel. Remember when you were younger and you were taught about the three primary colors: red, yellow, and blue. Let's examine the album cover next to a color wheel to see this triadic color scheme in effect. We can identify the yellow blonde of the hair, the variations of blue in the background, and the red used on her lips, and all of the reflected light which draws upon all three colors. Applying a color scheme such as this, artists and photographers can create a cohesive unit, and this thereby makes this album in question visually light to process as well as very easy to recall. Along with the art elements, we will apply the use of art principles to describe the piece. Next, we're going to look at emphasis, proportion, and movement. Emphasis is in reference to where our focus is drawn in an art piece, either intentionally or unintentionally. There could be multiple ways to interpret where the emphasis is in this piece, but here are some emphasis points to start. Sabrina's long blonde hair, her expression, the shine on her shoulder, and the kiss mark. As we've discussed with other art elements, these aspects stand out effectively in the portrait and start to suggest the themes of the album. Throughout the use of the art elements we've discussed, especially value regarding strategic placement of light and dark tones, we can see that the points of emphasis in the portrait draw the viewer into looking deeper at the piece, and they solidify Sabrina's brand and her overall imaging of the album. Moving on to proportion, we're looking here to identify the relationship of objects to one another. Proportion can be modeled after reality, and this principle at play creates believable and immersive landscapes and portraits. But it can also be teased out for effect and memorability. The most obvious proportional aspect to point out here is that Sabrina looks quite literally larger than life. She's pictured with no other internal objects or people, and so our sense of scale is intentionally off and it's shifted. It's a witty staging of her portrait, and it hints at a playfulness of the album and an overall sense of humor. Lastly, let's close our discussion of art principles by examining movement. Because of all the previously noted elements and principles working together, this simple album cover has internal movement to it, and our eyes glide in a circle looking at Sabrina's portrait. The soft gradient and the palatable colors make the portrait easy to look at over time. Our eyes naturally move around to take in her facial expression, the emphasized components, and the overall composition of this piece. That movement is key to making the album both cohesive as well as to have a natural sense of belonging in our visual framework, suggesting yet another art principle of harmony at play. Now, we've arrived at our final point of analysis: art and historical art reference. What does this painting have to do with this album cover? Art echoes itself across the centuries. Artists inspire other artists, and so on. This is a theme that we'll see over and over again, and it is no different with this album. With Short and Sweet, we see a woman casting an intriguing glance over her shoulder, framed by negative space and a striking expression with minimal accessories around her, asking us as an audience to stop and appreciate the person staring back. This sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? Girl with the Pearl Earring amplifies just how intriguing this approach is in creating a portrait. The Girl with the Pearl Earring, a Vermeer work, harkens back to the Dutch golden age of painting. You already know Vermeer, and I bet you'll recognize some of his work. Have you ever seen this before? Now, can you start to identify the similar features from this painting into what we're looking at today? Do you see a similar color scheme? Do you see a strategic use of emphasis? The striking focal points of each portrait suggest both symbolism as well as leave the viewer with one striking accessory or idea to remember for each piece. The Dutch Golden Age resulted in a focus on realism, attention to detail, and focusing on the beauty or intriguing elements of everyday life. And in this album cover, we also see a straightforward embrace of the artist simply as herself, and her confidence being the frame that she needs for her work. Overall, both portraits are straightforward pieces, communicating the subject clearly, while still managing to create a beautiful composition. Therein lies the thesis of this art analysis, that there is beauty in simplicity. If you enjoyed this deep dive in art analysis, please check out my channel, leave me a comment, like, and subscribe. Share with me your own analysis, your thoughts, and what we could look at next. Until next time, enjoy art so you can enjoy more of your life. I am Lindy Scholars.